Hello, my name is Hermina Berberian, and I am a PhD student at the University of Groningen. This is a pre-recorded presentation for the 2021 meeting of the Society for Mathematical Psychology. The title of today's presentation is Can we directly observe stages of cognitive processing, EEG-based identification of evidence accumulation stages? This is a collaborative work with Leendert van Manen, Hendrik van Rijn, Jelmer Borst, that was recently published in Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience, and you can see the full reference presented below. So what this talk is going to be about. You're probably familiar with evidence accumulation models that were commonly used to uncover underlying cognitive processes. What I want to know and to show in this presentation is that we can infer these processes directly from the brain using machine learning. So what are the cognitive processing stages? To illustrate that, I would like to bring an example that many of you might be familiar with, especially if you played games. You might recognize Super Mario. So let's play together. Did you notice what happened here? If you did, congratulations, you are uniquely attentive, but I did not because everything happened super fast. Let's slow it down and look at it again. So you can see that Super Mario jumps first time, very successful, second time, nice as well, and then the third time, basically the third stage, too ambitious jump and he falls down, and that's where we get game over from. So what important conclusion we come to is that by dividing a process into stages, we can understand its content better. You might ask yourself, how does it relate to cognitive processing? To answer that, I would like to show you a picture of a very famous Dutch researcher, Franciscus Donders. He was the first to hypothesize that between stimulus and response, there is a range of processing stages. To address this question, Donders designed several tasks. One, a simple task, and a second, more complex task that required all stages of the first task plus additional stage. To derive the duration of this stage, he subtracted reaction times from these tasks. Later, more sophisticated methodologies were developed to investigate processing stages, namely evidence accumulation models. However, these models were applied only to behavioral data, and in this project, we were interested in inferring the stages directly from neural data. Recently, a novel hidden semi-Markov model multivariate pattern analysis was developed to discover processing stages directly from EEG. The main advantage of this method is that it uses many EEG trials, unlike one reaction time measure. Here you can see an example of the resulting HSMM model from associative recognition task. The stages that were discovered were pre-encoding, encoding, familiarity, associative retrieval, decision, and response generation. I will discuss this method in more detail later in the presentation. The main goal of the current study is to discover evidence accumulation stages with HSMM and VBA. The following stages are of the talk, and you see I like the word stages. I will start with presenting the experimental tasks we designed. Next, I will discuss the results of evidence accumulation models, and as the last section, I'll present the results of HSMM and VBA applied to EEG. So let's start with stage 1, experimental design. We designed very simple visual discrimination tasks in which manipulated perceptual processing and decision difficulty. So let's look at our conditions. In condition 1, in easy shape conditions, participants were asked to discriminate based on the shape. So you can see they had to react with M when there was a circle and with N when there was a triangle. In easy characters, they were asked to discriminate between the letters and numbers. Additionally, we manipulated decision difficulty by creating difficult shapes and difficult characters, where the same stimuli were used as in easy conditions. However, the task was more difficult. Participants had to make decisions based on two parameters. For example, in difficult shapes, based on both shape and color. So let's first take a look at behavioral performance. Participants reacted faster to easy shapes than to easy characters. Additionally, the largest difference was observed when comparing difficult conditions to easy ones. So let's move to the stage 2 of this talk and let's discuss the results of evidence accumulation models. The core idea of this method is that participants gather evidence for certain decisions over time before they execute a response. This noisy accumulation process is represented with a gray wiggly line with a mean drift rate V and a threshold A. Additionally, in non-decision time is represented as T0, that is comprised of perceptual processing and motor preparation. The following results were obtained. Drift rate was higher for easy decisions than for difficult decisions. This matches previous studies that demonstrated that lower drift rate values express difficulty in the decision. Non-decision time was longer for characters than for shapes, and there were no differences in the threshold. If we look at these differences, at these results along with our reaction times, we can see that the differences in reaction times are represented in drift rate and non-decision time values. So next, let's look at the final stage of the talk, hidden Markov model multivariate pattern analysis. So what is HSMM and VPA? This method decomposes EEG data into processing stages. The method is based on an assumption that any cognitive event, the start of a processing stage, is accompanied by a negative or positive peak across different brain regions. These peaks, we call them bumps, mark the transition from one processing stage to another. It is assumed that bumps are separated by flats. Together with the bumps, they comprise stages in a cognitive task. While bumps are shared across all participants and trials, and you can see that if you follow a red line, the flats between them have a variable duration, which is modeled as a distribution. And you can see that if you follow blue line. So let's look at the resulting HSMM models. We found 5 stages that accounted for easy shapes condition. The same number of stages was found in easy characters. While all stages were shared, the second bump was different between these conditions, that is consistent with processing of different stimuli. In difficult shaped conditions, we found 5 stages. While all other stages had the same length, the 4th stage was significantly longer. And this indicated, indeed, the decision process. The same difference can be seen when comparing difficult characters to easy characters. Based on the temporal and spatial characteristics of the stages, we can functionally interpret each of them. And you can see in the figure that we found pre-attention, stimulus processing, familiarity, decision, and response. I unfortunately have no time to describe this in more detail. However, you can always ask me if you have questions. As the final stage of this analysis, we decided to test how the parameters from evidence accumulation models are represented in HSMM VPA stages. So we found a clear correspondence between the duration of stages 3 and 5 of HSMM and VBA method and the decision time of evidence accumulation models. Consequently, the non-decision component in evidence accumulation models was represented in the first two HSMM VBA stages. However, here the connection was less strong. The EAM reported a much higher variance of these stages than HSMM VBA method did. Please note, however, when looking at these graphs that they are presented with different scales, so the effects might look even more exaggerated. So what are the take-home messages? First of all, evidence accumulation models provided insights into cognitive processes by computing the duration of decision and non-decision components. Second is that HSMM and VBA method of analysis is a method that is capable of parsing a cognitive task into meaningful stages. And the third, that HSMM VBA allows us to zoom into the processes discovered with evidence accumulation models by finding underlying processing stages. Thank you for your attention. And you can see Super Mario proceeded to next level. And if you are interested in my research, please feel free to read our publication or contact via email.